Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the May installment of the NACDA's Social Justice in College Athletics series. My name is Lee Reed, Director of Athletics at Georgetown University, NACDA past president and a member of the Social Justice in College Athletics Task Force, and I will serve as your moderator for today's session. Unfortunately, Gloria Navarez will not be able to join us today as she was called away on some timely conference business. As you know, though, we'll miss Gloria, but as you know, she and her conference were the architects of the Russell Rule in the West Coast Conference, very similar to the Rooney Rule in the NFL and the Eddie Robinson Rule. And so I'll ask our colleagues here with us today to sort of weigh on that entire concept as we move forward. I would also like to recognize the other members of the task force this year. China Jude, who was formerly at the University of Wyoming and is now with the Denver Broncos. Congratulations to her on her new appointment. Ward Manuel, the Director of Intercollegiate Athletics at the University of Michigan, and Alan Green, the Director of Intercollegiate Athletics at Auburn University. And also thank Bob Vecchione and Katie Hine from the NACDA office for their great support of this initiative this year. So what are we here to talk about? As you know, there's been a lot of sessions this year on diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice, racial justice. We've done a lot on our campuses, and we're heading into about 14, 15 months of intense education, intense awareness, intense really accountability for the things that are going on in our country. And over the course of the last year, our country and industry has seen a seismic shift in the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As we continue the commitment to improving this area, ongoing conversation is imperative to creating an equitable environment for all. Recently named on-campus Pacesetters in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion by Sports Business Journal, this panel of respected administrators will explore why this work continues to be important and the reflections that they have from the past year as they look toward the future. Before we begin, I would like to remind our attendees that we will leave time toward the end of the conversation to field questions. You can enter questions into the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar at any time during the course of the conversation. We will hold all questions until we reach the Q&A portion of our session, about 45 minutes in, and then we'll call on Katie to give us those questions for our panelists. Now, I was trying to determine how I would introduce our distinguished panelists, and what I came up with is I want to let them introduce themselves. But before we do, I just want to say that I am honored to be here and sharing this Zoom, this podcast with Val Ackerman and what she has meant to intercollegiate athletics and college athletics, and also Martin Jarmond, both really good friends, both wonderful colleagues, and both people that I admire tremendously. And so with that, why don't I turn to Val? Why don't you introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and we'll go on from there.
All right, wonderful, Lee. Thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege to work with you, one of the great leaders in college sports, whom I learn from every time we have a conversation, friend. So great to be with you, and thanks for all your efforts on this incredibly important topic, and great to see Martin as well. So for the audience, I've been at the Big East now for 8 years. It's been a dream job. COVID made it a tough year. But I'm preaching to the choir on that. I was a student athlete. Back in the early days of Title IX, I attended the University of Virginia on a basketball scholarship. I majored in political and social thought there with an intention of going on to law school, which happened after I spent a year playing overseas basketball in France. Martin, being at UCLA was a great stretch. You're at a wonderful place, as I mentioned to you earlier. When I left Westwood in 1985, I came back east from where I'm from to where I'm from, and I practiced law at a big New York City law firm for a couple of years before I got my first job in sports. And that was as a staff lawyer at the National Basketball Association. The league at that time was quite small. It was less than 100 people on a floor and a half in Midtown. David Stern was in his fourth year as commissioner. And so I wound up just by fate, being on the ground floor of some really exciting developments in the game of basketball in the early 90s and thereafter. They included working on the first Dream Team that played in Barcelona, which was so exciting to be with that rock star team at that time as the NBA's international business was getting off the ground. And then I became the first president of the WNBA in 1997, following many years of working with USA Basketball. So I've had an exciting journey, and it's been really a full circle experience for me to now be back in intercollegiate athletics as we look to the 9th year of the new Big East following the reconfiguration in 2013. And as we together tackle some of the most mind-numbing at times, when I think about it, developments looming between NIL and transfers, and of course, keeping our pedal to the metal as we look to what we can continue to do in the area of racial and social and gender equity, racial and social justice and gender equity in our business. So Lee and Martin, it's an honor to be here with both of you today.
Val, thank you. And I hope you don't think I was going to not let you comment on your recent induction into the Naismith Hall of Fame, class of 2021. So shout out to Val for that. You want to mention anything about that?
Not only that I'm honored beyond words, grateful for all the opportunities the game of basketball has sent my way over the last 3 decades. And then thrilled, as I know you are, that Coach Jay Wright from our proud league is also going into the Hall, very well deserved. So thanks for saying it, Lee. I'm so honored.
Definitely. Thanks again for being with us, Val. Martin, I've been a fan of yours since the day I met you, man. We share a lot in common relative to I was a mediocre basketball player at the collegiate level. You were a really good basketball player at the collegiate level, just like Val.
I was worse than you, man.
Guiding your teams at UNCW to the NCAA, and certainly our bond together around the McClendon and you being a scholar and coming out of that program. Just I'll stop there because I could go on and on about your success and everything you've done for college athletics, and more importantly for student athletes. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, I'm humbled to be on the panel with both of you. And I'll say this really briefly about Lee. Lee has meant so much to our business and how he goes about his business. But it's not just the work that you've done, Lee, it's also the way you've done it. You know, I've studied how Lee moves, and I like to say people move. You know, there's a rhythm to how people do, and Lee never gets too high, never gets too low. I can remember being a 21, 22-year-old kid starting out at Michigan State and seeing Lee read, and it was someone that looked like me. And it's so important for us to see people that look like us doing what we may want to do. And that's part of why we're here on this panel, because of our student athletes and how diverse they are. And so I want to thank you, Lee, for setting the tone and being an example and a guide and a leader in our space, because I've learned and grown so much just from not only our conversations, but really just watching how you move. And also too with Val, it's unbelievable to be on this panel with Val. You know, she got her law degree from UCLA. We say Bruins changed the world, and Val has changed the world. It's not just college athletics or basketball. She's changing the world. And so it's an honor to be here with you, and you're going into the Hall of Fame. I mean, come on, like that's know, amazing. Right? That's amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, I'm just a kid from Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I was a student athlete, basketball. Spent time at Michigan State. My path was through fundraising and development. I left Michigan State to go to Ohio State, and I was there for 8 years. And after that, I had the opportunity to go to Boston College, the Heights, and become the athletic director there. And I was there for 3 years, and then I don't know, I had this crazy idea to accept a new opportunity and move from Boston to LA across the country during a pandemic. And just to let you know how crazy these times are for everybody, but just how crazy these times are. Monday was the 17th. That was my 1-year anniversary. And I probably, out of our 275, my teammates, our staff members in the athletic department, I've probably met 35, 40 people tops. Wow. Because we're not on campus. We're not coming into the office every day. Wow. And so it's what a time to be alive, but I'm excited and enthused, and especially this topic and the work that is being done and the awareness that's really, I think that's really taken root in our culture and our communities right now. It's a time for leadership and reflection, and I'm excited that I have the opportunity here at UCLA to be a part of that.
Yeah, Martin, that's great introduction and nice segue into what we're talking about. I think we've all been focused on this year, raising awareness, educating people so they can become better allies, educating ourselves through this process and understanding where our student athletes are. When you've been the first at least twice now. When you went to Boston College, you were the first Black AD, and hopefully we're getting to a point, or we will get to a point where we won't even have to know that that's even an issue, right? But you, from afar, I watched some of your first few moves, talking about moves, and you boldly appointed 2 Black senior level administrators. And I guess my question is what, long before obviously the movement and the moment we're in right now, what made you do that, and what were your thoughts behind making those decisions? Because as somebody looking at your career from afar, I'm like, wow, that's a bold move. And I shouldn't even think that that's a bold move, because both of the people you hired were extremely talented. So talk to me about the thought process and when you did that.
Absolutely, and he's referring to Jocelyn Gates and Vaughn Williams, and they're great friends, but even better people. For me, it always starts with, for you to have impact, you've got to do a good job. It always starts with, I got to do a good job. I can't worry about someone else's initiative or their perspective or what their agenda is. To do the work that I was called to do, I've got to do a really good job, and I learned that from my mentor, one of my mentors, Gene Smith. And so for me, it was always about the people. It wasn't necessarily because their gender or them being Black. It was really, who are the best and brightest and people I trust and I know, because that are going to help me and us do the work that's necessary. So I would say for me, it wasn't intentional from the standpoint of trying to get people that look like me. But I will say it was intentional when I could identify people that looked like me and then bring them into an environment that needed more diversity, quite frankly, and that's important. And so I think, you've got to be talented. And you have to have a perspective that, first and foremost, we have to put pieces in place that are going to make us the best we can be. Whether you're white, Black, Asian, doesn't matter to me. That said, too, you have to understand that we serve many different student athletes, different gender, different beliefs, different ethnicity. And so if you're not mindful of doing that, then I think it's shame on you as a leader. And quite frankly, Lee, I'm going to be even more candid with you. When I was thinking about hiring Jocelyn and Vaughn, I was worried because I'm the new Black AD, first time in the school's history. And now my first 2 hires are going to be Black also. What is that message going to send? Yeah, I thought about that. I can remember calling some of my mentors like, ooh, should I do this? Because I know it may be perceived a certain way from my colleagues, and where I landed was, you know what, it's the right thing to do. And if it's the right thing to do, I can sleep easy, because they were talented and they were deserving of the opportunity. And so that's kind of what I did. I thought about it. Don't make no mistake. Every move you make, for every action, there's a reaction, right? But you want to, if the action is the right action, it's the right thing to do, I can live with the reaction.
Yeah. You mentioned some good things. First and foremost, it's about talent acquisition. And we've all heard and been part of or shared data that shows that the more diversity you can bring to a challenge, to a team, to an organization, the richer the organization will be, right? And so there's value in diversity. And I'm glad we're starting to have this conversation about what diversity means. It's not checking a box. It's truly getting the most out of everybody that has, giving them a seat at the table, and then getting the most out of everybody around the table. Val, you have, when everything you read about Val, you see the word pioneer, right? Like she was, again, a first to do some of the things that she's done in her career. But Val, what I've been most struck by in working with you since 2013 and getting the chance to know you is how committed you are to championing not just racial diversity, but all forms of diversity. And I've been really struck by how committed that you've been in a lot of the projects that we've worked on at the Big East Conference, the hires that you made. I remember us having a conversation. I called you, I said, hey, where are we headed with the hiring? We formed a brand new league. When we separated back in 2012, 2013, Val had to put together an entire new organization. And through sort of her leadership, she was already focused on ensuring that organization, your staff, Val, was very diverse. Tell me what's made you so committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout your entire career, and then how does that play out today as we go through the challenges of today?
Well, thanks, Lee, for that setup. For better or worse, you're right. I have been on the front end, I will say, of this growing surge. I hope it becomes a surge. This growing movement towards including more women in the sports business. I lived it. I mean, when I started out at the NBA, literally there were no women. Senior women to look up to. The women at the league office at that time were the secretaries. And so I came in, I was the first female lawyer hired by the league. I had some very rough moments, frankly, when I was pregnant with my two daughters. That's tough. I think times are better now, easier. Technology has made it simpler for working parents to blend their personal lives with their professional responsibilities. I didn't have the benefit of that. So for me, it was about FaceTime. I had to come rushing back to the office. I was working for great bosses, but their wives didn't work. And so they weren't sure I was coming back to begin with, but I did. And so for me, I really do care about gender equity. Maybe we'll talk more about the review that's underway now by the Kaplan Group, whose report we'll all be waiting for with great anticipation when it gets released in July. But to your point, I care deeply about equity in all of its forms. And you're right, when I was putting together the conference office staff, which needed to be rebuilt, as you know, because the old Big East kept the staff, we got the garden and the name, and it was left to us to reconstruct that infrastructure. But diversity was top of mind for me. As I think you know, Lee, we have a very diverse staff at the conference office of the Big East. As it turns out, I have two of the most talented people in basketball working for me as senior executives, Stu Jackson and Tracy Ellis Ward, who worked with me at the NBA, who know as much as anybody about basketball. Tracy, we appointed a few months ago as the Big East's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, in recognition of her great work over the last 2 years in building our plan around DE&I. And as you know, Lee, we have a conference-wide working group around that with a representative from every school. Rosemary Kilkenny from Georgetown, your head of institutional D&I, sits on that body and is an amazing contributor to us. So, where did it come from? I don't know. Where else would it come from? It's the right thing to do. there shouldn't be a question about it. You shouldn't have to decide whether you're doing it or not. We're doing it. It just, to me, I care so deeply about this. I will give some credit professionally to David Stern at the NBA, who I believe was he didn't always move quick, and there were some things he didn't get right, but he had the vision, I think, to put basketball in a leadership position in terms of the importance of sport and society, moving things along from a racial and social justice standpoint. Look at where the NBA and the WNBA both are now, with Adam Silver picking up the torch. So I had good training, I think, on that. But my philosophy has been, this has to be done by every organization. We have to commit to hiring, as you and Martin have noted. We have to match up, and I think Martin nailed this. We have a diverse collection of athletes playing across our 3 divisions. We need a diverse collection of leaders. It has to match up. It has to match up. The leaders have to understand what our athletes are going through, what their interests are, what their needs are, and we have to be responsive to that. And I'm a white female. I don't stand in your shoes. We need people around us that understand it and the way that all these pieces fit together. So to me, it just makes sense. It's the right thing to do. And I can promise you, Lee and Martin, as long as I'm doing this job, it's going to be a top priority for the Big East to do our part.
Val, you have been in this last year part of several initiatives in the Big East Conference, and you were named, just like Martin and myself and Gloria. We're Pacesetters, I guess is what they called us, but it really came down to moving the needle on hiring. We can talk about all of the other things, that the awareness, raising the awareness, I think that plays a role in it, right? The education, I think that plays a role in it. But actually, at the end of the day, we need to be able to move the needle on hiring. But you have put together some programming in the Big East Conference. The Thompson Award, I want you to talk a little bit about. The DE&I committee work you mentioned, Be the Change. And then we had coaches in our basketball, assistant coaches in our league for Coaches for Action. Talk about some of the initiatives that have gone on this year, and then what you think we need to do more of as we move forward.
Yeah, surely. So for the audience here, I'll sort of sum up. We have at the Big East a strategic plan for D&I. We actually have incorporated DE&I into our conference-wide plan, which had 6 pillars and now has 7. So they're what you'd expect: academics, athletics. We have some business objectives, of course, but DE&I is now front and center for us. So we have a 7-pillar plan. And within D&I, you tipped us off, Lee. We have three buckets: hiring, education, and awareness. I think you're right. The latter 2 have to inform and make the first one happen. So I think you're spot on. At the end of the day, I think where we want to get to is representation. We want to, again, make sure that our leader ranks are matching up with the composition of our student athlete population. Our working group that I referenced guided us at every turn. We have a number of initiatives. In fact, our working group we formed 2 years ago in 2019. And then when things heated up last spring, we put the pedal to the metal and created a series of initiatives. They do include a partnership with RISE. And I want to thank you, Lee, for your leadership as a board member of RISE. Former NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue is Lee still think this board chair there, and has exerted tremendous leadership. And so we knew RISE was the external partner we needed to help with the education and with our activities around voting, registration, and engagement last fall. So that's been a critical relationship for us. We created a platform called BE, Big East, The Change, which has enabled us to deliver programming and speakers and create a forum for people within our league to talk about whatever topics they think we have to be talking about. And that's been a success. And I want to thank you, Lee, for participating as a guest on one of our programs. Lee noted the efforts of our, at that time, 21 Black assistant men's basketball coaches last spring who formed a group called Coaches for Action. And their counsel was invaluable last summer. They were focused on voting engagement. They're also in the process of forming a scholarship fund that will enable a minority student to attend a Big East school. And last but not least, it was their recommendation that we support the Black Lives Matter movement through through a patch that we created in the Big East font, BLM, that was worn this entire basketball season by our men's and women's basketball players and a host of student athletes across our conference and other sports. So I want to just thank the Coaches for Action group for their energy, their passion. Lee, I actually spoke to Ivan Thomas from Providence last week and told him we got to start talking about what we do now. Where do we go from here? And then, last but not least, I would love to talk more about hiring, Lee, and some strategies we have there. We are looking at the West Coast Conference rule and creating a talent bank. But I do want to give a nod here to Coach Thompson, who was iconic in so many ways, was one of the early champions in basketball about the importance of racial equity. His legacy is known to all. In his honor, we have created an award, the John Thompson Award, which will recognize annually someone or a department or a team within the Big East that has made significant contributions in support of racial and social justice. So we've got the nomination process out now for the first year's award winner. And it's our hope through this award, we can create some additional incentive and motivation for people within our league to continue the necessary work we need more of in order to get to where we all want to go.
Thanks, Val. Martin, you've been a part of a lot of different initiatives, both on your campus, within the Pac-12, before that within the ACC, and certainly your own personal journey. But one I'm interested in is you joined a group of Black athletics directors, the Black AD Alliance. What has that collection of members, what has that group done for you in terms of what you've been thinking about this past year? Because we're talking about moving the needle on hiring, and what's been interesting is to watch this last cycle of basketball coaches, where more so than ever before, I think, maybe in the history of the sport, there were so many minority coaches hired, in our case, Black coaches that were hired on the men and the women's side. And so what do you think happened there? And then what is it you're doing working with the Black AD Alliance that can help with administrators?
I'll bring a parallel to that Black AD administrators to what we're doing on campus, or what I'm seeing. When things happen in our country, one of the challenges that I've seen, especially with the social climate and social justice, is the lack of an opportunity for people to just talk. There's such a divide, and when there's an issue, a lot of times you don't talk about it because either A, you're not comfortable, B, you feel you're not impacted, or C, it's just hard. And what I have learned by listening to some of our minority student athletes is we just want a space to talk sometimes. I'll give, and that's where I'm going with the Black AD group is, sometimes it's nice when things are happening just to pause, reflect, and talk. And I noticed for me, after we had an incident that was racially sensitive among our student athlete community, and I met with a newly formed group, a Black Student Athlete Alliance. They just formed this year, and I met with them once or twice already. But after this situation that occurred, I met with them, and in my mind, what could I have done differently? I need to do this. I need to think about that. And one of the biggest takeaways I had is they said, Martin, when something happens, we would like a space to talk. We would like a space to just connect with other people that are like us, or maybe having an issue or a hard time. And that was a big takeaway for me because I never thought about that. And so I think it's really important for us to provide that space for not just student athletes, but ourselves as administrators too, because it's heavy when you're by yourself or you feel lonely or isolated. It's heavy, but that burden begins to be lifted when you can share with others. And so I think that's really important. And part of the work that we're starting to do is providing spaces. You educate, right? We did an anti-racism workshop for all of our coaches and students this past fall. That was great, and because what it did is it allowed for more dialogue to occur. DE&I is not going to get to the place it needs to be if it's not talked about all the time. It has to be a part of a consistent rhythm and conversation.
Yes.
That's one of the most important things that I have taken away with everything that has happened this past year in our country. So you can't just talk about it in a meeting on Monday and talk about it 6 months later. Yeah. You've got to figure out a way to make it a part of the agenda, either every meeting or every other meeting, because you've got to talk about it to keep it top of mind for action to occur. And so I love the group because it allows people to come together. It allows for that space. And I think too, you learn things obviously when you get people together that are different than you. We're not all the same. And some of our challenges may be different, but I think it's important. One of my takeaways is just the ability to provide space, to talk, to reflect, to connect, and also making diversity, equity, and inclusion a part of our daily rhythm as far as how we operate and how we move.
Yeah, that's so you hit on it. We had that same conversation, Martin, with our coaches. You have to make it. Our goal is to just make it part of the DE&A of our department and hopefully our university, where this is just what we do and who we are. But I would argue that making that space so people can truly get to know one another and have conversations, be it to just know one another or difficult issues or whatever the topic is. I think that is more important than an extra hour on an X and an O as a coach. I think if coaches, whatever the rare hours are, I think if they carved out time in building their team and their culture to just sit down and get to know one another, that would take us so much for both as programs being successful, as departments, as universities, and then obviously in our country. But I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's so important that we're able to give ourselves that time to do that and really value those opportunities. And I think not being together, it's amazing how we've used this sort of medium to sort of come together in different ways. But I can't wait. I know, like the both of you, I can't wait when we can be back together. Is there anything as we kind of wind down the time? I know there's so much that we can talk about, but you've both talked about really moving the needle on hiring, but doing the work that get us to that point. Is there anything, Val or Martin, that you want to touch on here as we turn to sort of the Q&A for today?
Hey, Lee, if you don't mind, I just want to give a shout out. I was going to acknowledge the Black AD Alliance because I've had some discussions with folks in your group and think it's a terrific forum. We had Nevin Capel speak to our DE&I working group last week, and she was absolutely fantastic. She offers a training program that's very thoughtful. I was taking, I watched the first module, took a lot of notes here. She speaks eloquently about the importance of cultivating a sense of belonging for all employees. And so I think everybody watching this webinar should go to her website and take a look at what she has to offer. I just want to, on the subject of gender equity, want to laud Patty Phillips at Women Leaders in College Sports, who works tirelessly to try to get more women into and to advance within the sports business, including women of color. and the We Coach group, which is dedicated to trying to get more women coaching women's sports. Right now, less than half of the women's sports teams in the NCAA are coached by women, which is sort of an interesting statistic. So there's other groups out there I know that are pushing hard on this. And I do think, Lee, my point is it's going to take a village. It's not going to be one of us. It's not going to be one school. It's not going to be one league. I do think we have in our business the benefit of scale. We've got 1,100 schools in D1. We've got 1,100 schools in the NCAA, 350 in D1. We've got 500,000 student athletes. We have to find a way, I think, to come together in an effective way, harness the energy and the power that we have. And to your point, the talking, I think, is critical. It can get us to a solution, but the talking won't be the solution. The action
Exactly
that comes from the talking will be the solution. And so again, I think if we can all come together in better ways, more effective ways, I think we can, again, get to where we need to go.
And thanks, Val. And that's why this panel is together, because you both of you have put your money, so to speak, where your mouth is. You have walked the talk relative to ensuring there are opportunities for minorities, for people of color in our business, and you have influenced your campuses, your organizations in very positive ways, and I'm certainly grateful for the work that you continue to do. This work is not easy. It's exhausting, really, and we've been at this now for really intensely for the last over a year now, and the energy that we need to keep this going, we have to feed off one another. So I think your comments were spot on. Martin?
I got something to add too, Lee, before
Absolutely.
the question. I'm a call to action kind of guy. I really think to Val's point, we can't just talk, we have to do. And so for everybody on this webinar, what can you do? We always think, if you want to do something, you don't know exactly where to start. We all are part of staffs that have meetings, right? Whether you're in compliance, whether you're in business office, conference office, you're in some kind of unit. You're a part of a unit, right? At your next meeting, whatever the subject or the topics are, ask the question: how does diversity, equity, and inclusion impact what we're talking about? If you just say that, and I've been a part of this, you would be surprised at some of the input that you get or the thoughts that are expressed. If you're talking about a student athlete program, for example, you might say, it's really, we don't have enough females looking at this, or we don't have a perspective that's not represented. And it can be as simple as that, but that's how you start and talking about it. So I would encourage everybody to just bring it up and say, how does diversity, DEI impact what we're talking about in this staff meeting? And that way, everybody can start that conversation and have it be a part of at the unit level. And culturally, that can kind of get to where it's a part of the consistent rhythm of what we're talking about and discussing.
That's a great point. There's some questions that are starting to come in, and I'll give one to each of you. Let me go through here. Val, I'll toss this one to you. Is there a plan to bring all these groups together by the NCAA or conferences? It seems that there are a ton of organizations with similar missions, and there is a saturation of these groups that stifle progress.
Well, I hope so, Lee, is the answer. I think everyone knows that Dr. Gregg has joined the national office over the past few months as their new chief. It's a different title, but his function includes that of being chief diversity and inclusion officer for the national office and the association. I know he's been spending a lot of time getting his legs around him, listening, trying to formulate a strategic plan. I think the equity review that I mentioned earlier has taken some of the attention away from folks in the national office on matters relative to racial and social justice. But it is my hope, Lee, that he can take a run at trying to bring together all of these well-intended groups and create, sort of the power of, of a unified effort here, as opposed to a fragmented approach here that may not be the right way to proceed with all of these great ideas. So to the extent that the commissioners can help that process, I know many of my colleagues are like-minded about these goals. We'll try to do that. And in the meantime, again, I think every conference is obligated to come up with its own plan, work with its schools, assist what all of our schools are doing on their campuses. And to your point, I think that's a good objective, to try to bring it together nationally in a better way.
Thanks, Val. Martin, question for you. And I think you hit on this before, but I think they want you to drill down a little bit deeper. Was there any pushback from the department or university to your decision to hire Black senior ADs in your first year? We're talking Boston College now. If so, how did you address or overcome it?
Sorry, I had it on mute. I got to put some money in the fishbowl right there. No, the answer is no. And the reason why, if there was, I didn't hear it, because you don't focus on that. And I think people from a department standpoint understand that as a leader and as a new leader, you have a vision, and you can follow, or you can, not follow and get off the bus. So I didn't have any pushback on that at all. And if I did, I'm not aware of it. Again, it's the right thing, and I sleep well with that.
Yeah, great point. It does take courage, right? Leadership takes some courage, and in today's world, you're often making tough decisions, and you just have to go with your gut and what you've learned along the way. And like you said, you have a great network of people that you rely on and bounce ideas off of. But
it's a contact sport.
You
got to roll the sleeves up. It's a contact sport, man.
Right. That's right. I think I have one here. Val, how do you deal with the resistance to social change from colleagues in college athletics? So we've all been in those rooms where, there is some resistance, obviously.
Well, I'm kind of like, I'm in the Martin camp. If I hear it, I wouldn't let it bother me anyway. I think we just, stick to our principles here. We do what we think we have to do as leaders. We take the steps we know we have to take to make progress in this area. So, I think maybe the answer to your question, Lee, is that we all, at the end of the day, have to be advocates, for this work. I mean, I will say, my framework that I think about, in this area includes the following 4 words: up, down, around, within. Up, down, around, within. So as a commissioner, when I think of up, that's my board. That's the president of my schools. I think about what I'm supposed to be saying to them. How can I influence their thinking about what they should be doing on their campuses and what we could be doing as a group of schools? The down is how we manage our staffs. And for you, Lee, that might be your, the leadership at Georgetown. Yeah. Down is how we manage our own staffs. They're looking to us for guidance. They want us to be leaders. They're looking to us for courage, your word, Lee. And so we have to recognize our responsibility to the people who report into us. Around gets to your last question, Lee, which is how we can come together as an industry to harness our resources and our clout for change. We, say it again, we need a national strategy for sure, because right now it's fragmented. And then within gets to what we as individuals think and do. And I like your point, Martin, about just what are we doing every day? If you can do one thing every day to move the ball forward, what would it be? You need to go to bed at night saying, hey, what did I do today on DE&I, whatever form, to make a difference in somebody's lives or to kind of inch it forward for our country or our society. So, that's kind of how I think of it. Before we get off, I want to give you a nod, Lee, because on the subject of how to get it done, you're one of, I hope will be a growing number of athletics departments that have hired a full-time DE&I officer. We're beginning to see that, to have somebody who wakes up every day and thinks about it, is pushing you, is coming to you with fresh ideas, I think is going to be part of the solution to have those people in place. I just want to laud you and Georgetown for making that move.
That speaks to one of the questions I was going to give to Martin because it was his point. Let me get the questions back up if I can here. The question was, Martin, I think it's still here. You made a great point about DE&I being consistent agenda item with your staff. How do you go about making those weekly touch points valuable and actionable rather than just another bullet point on the agenda? And I guess my point is, before you answer, is that to be clear about the diversity, equity, and inclusion position that's embedded within our athletics program and will become more and more across the country, people will do this, that overall responsibility still rests in our office, Martin. And we drive that. And it's good to have somebody there that knows the language, that knows what's going on, that can communicate and deal with that 24/7. But it's truly sort of up to us to ensure that it is a priority in our departments. And I tell people all the time, you'll catch me with the language all the time. I don't know the fancy language that goes with this space. What I know is that I want everybody, student athletes, coaches, staff in our department to, number one, feel respected, that they have a voice, because they do. And number two, that they're never marginalized, that they're not worried about where they came, how they got to the point they are. At the end of the day, they're here and they contribute to our department. And that to me is the definition of success. But how do you sort of make that actionable as opposed to just something that's on your agendas every day when you meet with your team, even though you haven't met with your whole staff yet at UCLA?
Yeah, I was gonna say mine's a little bit limited, but I can tell you, change starts with small steps. It's never something big that gets to the change that you want. It's always the little small steps, in my opinion. And so I'll give you an example. One of the things that I try to do intentionally is I try to connect people that maybe otherwise would not talk or would not communicate in this way. So a prime example, I may have someone on staff who is from an external area and they don't look like me, for example. And I might say, why don't you talk to this person in compliance about that and get their perspective? And I'm doing that for two reasons. One, we're better the more diverse we are and the diverse our mindset and our thinking, right? So that's important. But the second piece of that is usually it might be, if it's a male, a female, or if it's someone white, Asian, or just a difference from a unit perspective, but also from a diversity perspective in however way it shapes out, because it gives you that opportunity to connect with them and hear their perspective. And usually what happens, they may provide a perspective because their lens is different in how they choose to view it than yours. And that might spur you to do that again on your own. So I try to encourage people to get someone else's opinion that doesn't have the same perspective or lens that they do. That's an action that I think, again, little, small, but it gets us talking. And again, that's where I think DEI has to be talked about more consistently and a part of the rhythm of our daily work.
That's a great point. Well, we're close to out of time, Katie. I want to thank both of you for taking time with us and with the membership to review this topic. It's important. It should remain front of mind. I'm proud to be in this business. Val, you mentioned athletics. We're leaders in this industry, and we should be. Athletics should be leaders in this space as it relates to moving our institutions, our business, and certainly this country forward as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so can't thank you enough for giving your time and know how busy both of you are. Wish you well as you head into the summer months. And with that, I guess that's a wrap then. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Lee.
Great being with you both.
Good to see you, Val.
Yep, great being with you.